What if your next podcast appearance wasn't just another interview? What if it was the start of a conversation that your ideal clients would trust and can't forget? Too often when we talk about branding, people jump to logos, colors, a fancy font, but those are decorations. Your brand, it's the promise you make and the experience you deliver. And before you ever hit record on your next interview, you've got to get clear on how you can intentionally show up and how the audience is hearing you. Today, I'm joined by Liz Brooks. Now, Liz is one of our senior client account managers here at Interview Valet. She's been in the trenches with hundreds of clients leading all their campaigns, and she knows exactly what makes a brand connect or crash on a podcast. We're diving into how to deliver and define your voice attributes, why consistency builds trust, and how your brand can echo across podcasts, emails, websites, and in all your communications. If you've ever wondered how to sound more like you and less like some sleazy sales pitch, or how to become the kind of guest that hosts love and audiences remember, then this episode, well, it's your blueprint. You know, so many times when we talk about the branding basics, people think, oh yeah, it's my logo, it's my color, it's the font I use. Those are the graphics. That's not the brand. And especially on a podcast interview. And we talk about this a lot. And today I'm joined by Liz Brooks, one of our senior client account managers, to really talk about the basics of that branding that you need before you go out on a podcast interview. Liz, welcome.
Hi, Tom. Thanks for having me again. Third time's a charm, right?
That's right. And I always think of if I closed my eyes and listened to a television ad, not that I watch television anymore, there is a different tone for a BMW ad as a Honda ad, right? You don't even have to know what the name of the company is. You know what it is, what they're talking about. Or if a Apple ad started to sound like an ad from a PC company like Microsoft, it'd be like, there's a disconnect. It just doesn't seem right. So having that brand on point is so important. And I'm excited to dig into this with you today.
Absolutely. And you're right, Tom. Even with your eyes closed, when you're listening to a commercial like that, you can usually already tell who it's going to be without having to see, again, the graphics, the logo, or anything like that. That is, that's the visual, that's the fluff. But ultimately, your brand is the messaging, the impression that you're leaving, as well as, the promises that you're making in your delivery on them. So a lot of it is about, not only setting yourself apart, but consistency is always really important. And that's what makes you memorable and easy to catch on, even with your eyes closed when you're listening to a commercial.
And they talk about like voice attributes. And I didn't fully understand that. You helped me understand that. And then Darren Horowitz, one of our clients from 1010 Group, right? So what do you mean when you say your brand's voice attributes?
So we talk a lot about tone of voice, right? We use that not only to define how you speak on a podcast, but how you use that messaging online, how you repurpose that into a blog. You want that to be consistent throughout your communications, right? My personal brand, my personal tone of voice, is I'm knowledgeable, but I'm a little bit more laid back. I'm easy to work with. That is what I want to deliver. That is the impression that I like to leave with people. And whether it's on the professional side, podcasting, or even, on the musician side of things, professional, knowledgeable, easy to work with is my personal brand. And you can probably tell that, throughout all the interviews that we've had, whereas with Interview Valet, we, are still helpful. We are knowledgeable, but we take a much more data-driven and I think authoritative approach in our messaging across our platforms. The way that we speak with our clients and speak with our hosts, we do deliver that data, to back up our messaging. We always have, and we're always coming up with new ways to show and present that data as well and include that in our messaging. So, that is the company's brand essentially. And then all of our clients have their own specific tone of voice, right? Our B2B clients are going to be a lot different from our health and wellness clients. And it's also that tone of voice that resonates with those different kinds of hosts in that space or in those different spaces, who will also match, that branding and that tone, if you will.
And think about that brand voice attributes that applies to podcasts, but also to other communications, right? So I can think of times where you get an email from somebody, right? And it says it's my bank, but there's something that looks off in that, the way they talk, the way they express themselves. And the first thing that happens is you put your guard up and say, something wrong. This is not the same person.
It's an immediate red flag. Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And I think years ago, my wife, Karen, she told me that she followed these husband and wife team and she loved their emails and their content and everything. And then she started to get these emails that just didn't seem like them. And I looked at them and I'm like, oh, I recognize that. That's from Jeff Walker's launch book. And they were copying and pasting them and putting them in there, right? We made a bet. And I said, I bet you the next email is this because I had the book. And she was amazed. And she's like, how did you know that? Because I said, that is not them. That's a copy and paste that they took. And she didn't know what was wrong, but she knew that their brand voice was different. And that caused her to lose all trust.
Yep. Yep. And, not only can that come from someone else, but I think just yourself when you're sending emails and messages and putting content out there, if you're not consistent, if, you're coming across like really, really gracious, really happy, in one email or sentence, and then you turn around and you're a completely different person, that, that doesn't instill trust with the audience. That doesn't instill trust with hosts as well. So, it is your personal but also professional branding and tone of voice that you want to be consistent, and not just with emails, but, with your blogs, with your newsletters, which you mentioned, that was what turned Karen off because that was a little bit different, as well as just the content that you have on your website as well. You want it to all match, because again, it's about consistency and instilling trust across all platforms.
Yeah. And it's even consistency of beliefs, right? People want to hear you speaking the same gospel or hymnal at different places. And, the disruptive statement and those strong points of view have to be consistent through that. Could can you unpack that a little bit, where people want to know what you believe and what your view on the world is?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, when we are taking clients on, we ask them a lot, what is your why? What is a problem that you help solve? What is the pain point that you're trying to address? But also, who else is doing the same thing and what sets you apart from them? What is your mission statement, if you will? I can think of one of our previous clients, Supergut, who Mark Washington was the CEO of the company, and he developed the product because his sister died from diabetes, and it was such a personal story and such an emotionally driven why as to why he developed this product and this company that really, really resonated with audiences. And then, something else that was really interesting about them as well, when we first started with them, they were trying to brand themselves more towards younger audiences. They were trying to hit Zillennials, Gen Z. And even though we were getting bigger shows for them, we weren't really hitting the mark because the branding just didn't resonate with younger audiences. And then, we pivoted and experimented, and then, tried to go for the longevity folks, wellness over 40, wellness after 50. These shows were maybe a little bit smaller and more niche, but that personal story and that branding really, really resonated with them. And I think it was after the first, the wellness over 40 specifically, that they saw like over 30 conversions with just one episode. And again, they were consistent throughout. It wasn't resonating with the younger audiences. That a lot of younger people don't care about diabetes or gut health, essentially.
Yeah. And it's like, things apply to different people, right? If you start talking about losing a child, well, if you're if you don't have children or if you're not that age, it may not resonate that same way, right? Content is king, but context is God. And I think you make such a point there too about those signature stories. You should know what stories you're telling to what audiences before you go behind the microphone. And there's an art to that. The idea of everybody just says, just tell your story. No, the story's got to have a point to it. You've got to think through that beforehand. So how do you think about that, Liz? How do you teach and help clients with that?
I mean, with general storytelling, right? You want to follow that arch. That is the whole point of storytelling and what's going to resonate with an audience. So you want to have your origin story, your problem, the climax, and then ultimately you want to have a solution. And the whole time you want to be, if you can, authoritative, but also educational. You don't want to be too salesy with it. You want to be able to help the audience with something and have them take something away that really resonates with them. I think, another way to do that is by crafting disruptive statements as part of your story and your why and your purpose, right? That I think not only catches the attention of hosts, but it catches the attention of audiences as well. You don't want to make wild predictions or anything like that. But if you can have something, a little bit contrary that like takes people off their guard, if you will, that's always helpful. And also you don't want to be telling the same story over and over again, because ultimately if you're doing that, people are going to see your name and they're going to skip that episode because they already heard what you have to say, right? So you want to make sure that your core messaging, your story arc, is tailored to the specific show and audience that you're talking to, right?
I love that idea of the disruptive statement, and actually to start the story that way can be so powerful, right? The idea of don't say what you agree with, right? We all agree with, apple pie, all the common things. Find something you can say, I reject this premise, right?
Yeah. Make folks think outside the box. Exactly.
People will stop and think about that. I think of a client we had years ago, Bix Bixen, and he's like, most people don't have a future. Well, that's a pretty strong statement. And he's like, no, they've got an extenuation of their past. They take last year and add 5% to it. He says, that's not a future. And then he starts talking about how he works with companies to set that vision and have the conversations that draw them towards it. Right. I often will tell people that, podcast guesting is a hobby. And they're like, what do you mean? Right. I said, well, no, podcast guesting, if there's no strategy behind it, if you're just doing it for fun, that's called a hobby.
Yeah.
If it's marketing, then it's a strategy. And just to do that, or the old, people have made millions, hundreds of millions of dollars selling this idea. Oh, you're just one funnel away, right? No, I reject that, right? That we're not one funnel away. We're one conversation away, right? You don't need more leads. And everybody stops and goes, what did he say? No, you do not need more leads, right? You need more profits. And that comes from people that value what you do, and just reframing that. And then to tell the story behind it, that is where it's powerful, where the story supports the point of view.
Absolutely. I think, a couple of the stronger campaigns that we've worked with recently were clients that had these very kind of like attention grabbing mission statements. And I'm going to try not to say specific names here. But one who we worked with for a very long time, who, worked in the legal area, his whole thing was treat your law experience, your legal advice as primary care versus going to the emergency room, right? He was trying to get people to look at their legal protection in a completely different light, because everybody waits until they're in an accident or they need to find a lawyer in that moment. And it's so hectic versus just having that. I think he treated it like as a subscription, right?
Yeah.
Just to protect yourself moving forward, which a lot of people don't think about at all. Somebody else within the consultant space, Their mission statement is to ditch the billing hour, which consultants are like, oh my God, that's our entire, well, we've done this forever since the beginning of time. So that is a very attention grabbing contrary statement that hosts immediately latch onto. And then the storytelling is backing that up and presenting that why, which also, those statements automatically differentiate you from other competitors, because you're looking at things in a completely different light and educating the audience on that.
Yeah. And the story supports the brand. The brand doesn't support the story or the origin story.
Exactly.
So let's unpack the origin story here, because there are some people out there, and I cringe when I hear it. Their advice is just go on lots of podcasts and tell your story, your origin story, and that everybody will be drawn to you. And to me, I just look at that as no one really cares about your story. They care about their pain. And if your story supports what you can do to help them, then it's applicable. And so how do you think about powerfully using that origin story in your brand, in your interviews, in your conversations?
It's a very great way to get across in a more personal way, your original why and your intention when you're sharing your origin story. But if you've said it 100 times, it's going to sound rehearsed. Also, there's a time and a place for it, right? We were talking earlier about Mark Washington and his origin story about his sister. On a podcast like What Would Dave Do? Which that whole podcast started because the host's friend died. That's a core integral part of the brand of that podcast. That's a great place to share that origin story and to focus on that. However, on a wellness show, probably not the best place to dive into death and despair and things like that. But you can quickly get through that and then go on to your why, the product that you created, your brand, the problem that you're solving, and then direct that to the results and how that helps the audience essentially and delivers results that they're looking for.
Yeah. And I think that's great. You've got the big story, and then you can pull out pieces as you need there. One of the examples I always think of is, Brendan Bouchard, had a great business and stuff like that. But if you ever hear him tell his origin story, it's word for word, like it's memorized, and you can tell this is the next part. And so from that standpoint, it's like after you hear it once, it's like, oh, here we go again. And, word to word, right? Whereas if other people pull out little pieces of it, and I think of like one of our clients, Gavin Zaglinski, who started Acuity Scheduling, right? And he would talk about how he got started with it. And his original user feedback came from his mom and other hairstylists that she worked with. Right. And that's what he did it. And it's like, okay, it made it fun. It made it interesting. Now, if he was in an all male audience, would he have said the same thing? No, he'd probably say my mom, who was a business owner. Right. So those little things to put it, so that the story is more applicable to the audience.
Yeah. And then also, I think another important thing too is to not dwell on the origin story and make it too long where it's not appropriate. We, when we work with our clients, especially helping them build their brand, we do a lot of help in terms of preparing their professional bios and giving them different versions of that, right? We have a short word bio. We have a medium word bio that's like 100 words. And then we have the long form. And then we also provide a suggested intro for hosts that has some of their background as well, right? So it's not like we're delivering one bio to be used over and over and over again, because that's not going to resonate. We have different versions of it for different applications, right?
And even drawing that bio from things that they've talked about, things that they've written, because there's nothing worse when you get a bio or an introduction and it uses words that person never would. Right.
Oh,
that
absolutely.
Seem totally out of character with that. You can definitely, that's how you can flag it was a 20-year-old intern that wrote this, or it was AI that wrote this. Clearly this bio doesn't reflect them.
Absolutely. And that ties back to that tone of voice and that consistency, right? And we do a lot of deep research when we work with our clients with tone of voice and with their bios and everything like that. And it's funny that you said, when you see something in writing and it looks like an intern did it, that's something else that I think is very unique to podcasting in terms of building your brand is that the message is coming directly from you and not anybody else. And the listener automatically knows that, which is going to instill trust, especially if your messaging is consistent, as we talked about before. A lot of times, with like traditional PR and marketing outlets, when you're getting an article on Bloomberg or something like that, right? The messaging is coming from the PR team and then it's going through the editor and then it's probably going through a couple other people before it's finally published. And so that tone of voice, that core messaging can oftentimes be lost or distilled, and it doesn't really sound like the person, right? So podcasting, when you see the person, when you hear them, the way that they talk, their background, how they present themselves, that's all very important in terms of really building your brand, and getting trust from the audience because they know who you are and it's coming directly from you. And you're also borrowing the authority of the podcast host that you're speaking to and ultimately borrowing the trust of their audience as well.
Yeah. And I think especially as you've got more than one person that's representing the company. And that could be from, customer communications. It could be actually writing for your organization or speaking for it. We went through this tone of voice exercise it's about a year ago now, because we wanted to get more people out speaking on podcasts. And thanks to Darren Horwitz from 1010 Group, he showed us how to do a tone of voice report. And, heck, he does them for big brands and cost $50,000 to do them. And we were able to do one based off of our previous interviews. And it was very interesting. In some ways, it's sort of that tribal knowledge, Liz, of we say this, we don't say that.
Yeah.
And to actually see it boiled down there was very important, right? We are all about education. We are all about empowering people. We don't tell our stories because we're not the hero. We evangelize for our clients, right? We don't put down other people in the market. So all of those, do's and don'ts, we don't do high pressure sales. And so I think it's all of that is important for that tone of voice for when we've got 5 people from Interview Valet that are speaking on podcasts. They're all sort of speaking from a similar hymnal. And even when we put out blogs or emails, it all follows that tone of voice guidelines.
Absolutely. When we share those reports with clients, something that we're always telling them as well is share this with your team, share this across everybody who's speaking for you so that you can use this same tone and be consistent across all platforms. Because if you have a CEO who's going out and saying messaging one way and then the CMO goes out and says something completely different, that's not consistent and people are going to be confused. Again, different people are going to have different stories to tell, different examples, different pain points to address. But ultimately, you want to tie it back to that same core messaging that is part of your brand, whether that be one person's brand or entire company's brand. Regardless of the size, you want that messaging to be consistent. And that's such a huge point of communications, internal communications, external communications, right? Is keeping that tone of voice consistent, professional, and helpful. You want to be helpful.
And what do we speak on, right? Are we experts in everything or are there just key topics? And I think this is something that individuals need to think through, but also organizations, right? And to proactively come up with your topics that you want to address. And that could be in webinars, it could be in blogs, it could be in social media posts, but especially on podcasts, because those interview topics are foundational to getting results.
Definitely. If you're in a very specific niche investing space, right? Joe Rogan isn't going to be the right show for you. You don't want to be able to speak to everything. You don't want to be a jack of all trades and master of none. Something that I've been saying a lot recently is niche is riche, right? find your target audience, find their pain points, what's going to speak to them. Have topics that aren't super broad, make them specific, make them attention grabbing. Again, like you said, like coming up with those specific topics that are going to resonate versus just trying to speak to everything is going to be a lot more powerful, especially in an interview.
Yeah. And when you go to repurpose it and everything, if you do the same interview over and over, you're going to burn people out, right?
Yeah.
I'm always amazed when I hear people say, oh, I did 50 podcast interviews. And if you listen to them or you analyze it, it's like, no, you did one interview 50 times and you don't get any extra credit for the last 49.
Right. And when you're sharing that repurposed content, it's not going to be interesting to anybody seeing it if you're just putting out the same thing, right? You wouldn't put out the same blog 27 times. So when you're going on these interviews, you want to think, what your calls to action are. You want those to be consistent, but change up your sound bites, change up your perspective based on the show itself, because we always say one interview is a month's worth of content, right? You share the interview, you share the blog, you share your repurposing clips with those, strong taglines and sound bites that you said throughout the interview. So if you're saying the same ones over and over, you're not going to have anything new to share. You may have 50 interviews, but you're still just going to have that 1 month of content if you're putting out the same thing over and over, right? We also talk about building your digital library with podcasting and how important that is now with large language model optimization, which is how we're getting a lot of our clients now. But if you're saying the same thing over and over, doesn't matter how many podcasts you do, ultimately you're not going to reach a larger audience if you're just saying the same thing, right? Because the model is still just going to pick up that same messaging over and over. So you definitely want to expand and have different things to say. Again, try to make that digital library of yours expansive and not repetitive. But also, again, you don't want to be a jack of all trades. You still want to have your core messaging consistent throughout.
Yeah. And you talked about the digital library. I think of also the digital library of sound bites, because so much of the podcast now is consumed in these little sound bites. So, what is it? Rogan, they say, gets heard by 100 million people. Well, he gets about 2 million downloads per episode. The other 98 million are listened to a 60-second clip or 90-second clip, right? And guests can do the same thing. So how do you intentionally think about sound bites before you even get behind the microphone?
Yeah, I think when you're developing your sound bites, first of all, you want to listen to the show, see what recent episodes have been covering and talking about, and then look at your topics and see how those resonate with these other topics that have been spoken on recently, right? Because that's what the audience is paying attention to. Something that we do, we provide a lot of interview analysis also now for our clients, where we put their interviews into our system and it comes out with, what they did well, areas for improvement, what were the strong sound bites, right? So something you can do is take your previous interviews. You can even use help of ChatGPT or Gemini or whatever if you want to go in and see how you can tailor that messaging to the specific audience of the podcast, and then change up those sound bites a little bit so that it resonates with that audience versus just having the same ones that you're spitting out all the time. We have the tools now. So if you need a little bit of help, you can use it.
And I love the idea of getting outside perspective, right? That could be AI. That can also be the team, right? My microphone makes me sound good. My team makes me look good. And after my interviews, they'll do the same analysis they do for clients. And they'll tell me, Tom, you spoke 36% faster than the host. Slow it down. Or your longest monologue was 7 minutes. Shorten it up. But there's so many times where you'll come and say, this is what you said. You could shorten it up and make it more impactful this way. And I'm like, oh, you're so right. That's a much better soundbite. So learning from your previous ones. And the other thing that our team that does all the repurposing points out to me is two things. Could you pause after the big statement you make, right? Like a comedian, that pause after the punchline. Do that so it can sink in with people, but also so you can cut it up as a clip. And then the other one is for sound bites and stuff like that. There are so many times where the host will give you a compliment and you don't want to talk over that. So if they're telling you, Liz, on how great you are and how much you understand them and have helped them, you don't want in the back be going, oh, thanks. Yeah. I appreciate that. And I would do that. And the team would come back and said, thank you. You just messed up a perfect soundbite.
That's so true. Providing space within the conversation is very important. A lot of folks feel like they need to fill in the space of the time of the interview, and then they start rambling, where you're completely right. Oftentimes, brevity helps the messaging be more clear and memorable for the audience. And then, if you give them that pause for it to really sink in, as you mentioned, there's two great sides to that. First of all, it lets it sink in with the audience, with the hosts, themselves, but it's easier to make a sound bite out of that for sure.
Yeah. Well, as we wrap up here, we've talked a lot about what you can do to make your brand powerful on a podcast interview. Any final thoughts or any final words you want to share with people?
We've talked a lot about being consistent and building that trust with your brand. I think ultimately, branding is not only the promise that you make, it's also the experience that you deliver. So when those align, your audience doesn't just notice you, they're going to trust you.
Yeah. And that's what it's all about. It's so many times people were going for attention, right? Influencers get attention. Business owners, experts, they get that authority and trust. So, Liz, what's ordinary to you is amazing to others. Thank you so much for sharing your insights.
Thank you, Tom. Can't wait to talk again.
Let's be clear. Your brand is not your logo. It's that gut feeling people get when they hear your message. And Liz nailed it. Branding is the promise you make and the experience you deliver. If these two things align, people won't just notice you. They'll trust you. They'll remember you. They'll engage with you. And in a crowded digital world, trust is the ultimate conversion tool. So here's your action step. Before your next interview, ask yourself, what impression do I want to leave? Is it authoritative, easy to work with, data-driven? Decide what your voice attributes are. Then run a quick audit. Is your website saying the same things as your podcast interviews? Are your stories and sound bites consistent with that context? You see, podcast interview marketing isn't just about getting on more shows. It's about getting more results from every podcast interview. If today's episode sparked some ideas, reach out. We'd love to help you align your brand and your voice so that every interview works harder for your business. Until next time, remember, in a world full of noise, the most powerful thing you can be is authentically you. That separates you from the noise. You become the signal that people tune into.